The Battle of Midway, one of the most decisive naval battles in history, took place from June 4th to 7, 1942, in the vast Pacific Ocean. It was fought near the tiny U.S. mid-Pacific base at Midway Atoll, a coral reef located halfway between Asia and North America. This strategic location made it an ideal outpost for the U.S. Navy and a valuable target for the Japanese. In the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan had been on an offensive rampage across the Pacific, seeking to expand its sphere of influence. The Japanese had their sights set on Midway as part of a larger plan to establish defensive perimeter lines in the Pacific, intending to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet in the process, a fleet that had been a thorn in their side since the start of the conflict. The stage was thus set for a colossal clash, a conflict that would significantly impact the course of World War II in the Pacific. Little did the Japanese know that U.S. codebreakers had cracked their naval code and knew of the impending attack, allowing the U.S. to prepare a formidable response that would ultimately turn the tide of the war. Strategic Assault and Carrier Takedown, June 4th, 1942. The Battle of Midway, a pivotal clash during the Pacific War, commenced on June 4th, 1942, with the initial airstrikes and contact between the American and Japanese forces. The day culminated in the sinking of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a crucial turning point in the war. In the early morning hours, American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the Japanese invasion force, and by 7 o'clock, PBYs were sent to shadow the Japanese fleet. The initial airstrikes were launched by the Japanese against the Midway Atoll. A total of 108 aircraft, primarily B-5N2 Kate bombers and A-6M20 fighters, took off from carriers Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, targeting Midway's defenses. Despite the ferocity of the Japanese air assault, U.S. anti-aircraft fire and defending fighters inflicted significant damage on the attacking force, shooting down several Japanese planes. Concurrently, American carrier forces were moving into position. The U.S. carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown had launched aircraft towards the Japanese fleet, unknowingly heading towards one of the most decisive engagements in naval history. The first American attack came from Midway-based aircraft, including B-26 Marauders armed with torpedoes, TBF Avengers, and SB-2U Vindicators, all aiming to strike at the Japanese carriers. However, these early American attacks were largely unsuccessful and suffered heavy losses due to the intense anti-aircraft fire and the formidable Zero fighters. Then, a squadron of Douglas TBD Devastators from the carrier USS Hornet, known as Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, led by Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, made a courageous but ultimately tragic attack on the Japanese fleet. Without fighter cover, all 15 Devastators of VT-8 were shot down, with Ensign George Gay being the sole survivor. Similar attacks by Devastators from USS Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 6, VT-6, and Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3, VT-3, were also met with heavy resistance and were almost completely wiped out. Despite these heavy losses, the U.S. torpedo attacks served a significant strategic purpose. They held the Japanese carriers in place and pulled their protective fighter screen down to sea level, leaving the carriers vulnerable to dive bomber attacks. 3 U.S. dive bomber squadrons arrived at the perfect time and altitude to attack. The first to arrive were Douglas SBD Dauntlesses from Enterprise's Bombing Squadron 6, VB-6, led by Lieutenant Commander Richard H. Best, and Scouting Squadron 6, VS-6, led by Lieutenant Wilmer E. Gallagher. They focused their attack on Kaga and Akagi, setting them both ablaze with accurately placed bombs. Shortly afterward, Dauntlesses from Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3, VB-3, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell F. Leslie, arrived and targeted Soryu, scoring multiple direct hits that left the carrier ablaze and irreparable. Within a few minutes, 3 of Nagumo's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, had been transformed into flaming wrecks. Hiryu, the only surviving Japanese carrier, launched a counterattack later that afternoon, targeting USS Yorktown. Despite significant damage and a brief power loss, Yorktown's damage control teams managed to save the ship, and she was operational again within an hour. Meanwhile, American forces continued their search for Hiryu. Late in the afternoon, after relentless searching, aircraft from USS Enterprise located and attacked the Japanese carrier. Despite fierce resistance, American dive bombers managed to land multiple hits on Hiryu, leaving her engulfed in flames and eventually leading to her sinking. Thus, by the end of June 4, 1942, the Japanese had lost all 4 of their aircraft carriers engaged in the battle, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, to American air power. This, combined with the loss of many of their best aviators, was a devastating blow to Japan and marked a significant turning point in the Pacific War. On the other side, the American carrier USS Yorktown, despite being severely damaged, remained afloat. The damage she had sustained was significant, but her crew had managed to control the damage and keep her in the fight. Throughout this first day of the Battle of Midway, the United States had shown the value of intelligence, air superiority, and the bravery of its servicemen. While losses were heavy, particularly amongst the torpedo squadrons, their sacrifice had not been in vain. The attacks they launched drew the Japanese defenses down, allowing the dive bombers to strike effectively. The events of June 4th set the stage for further U.S. victories and represented the first major check on the until then seemingly unstoppable Japanese advance in the Pacific. It was a costly day for both sides, but for the Japanese, the cost was a significant portion of their carrier strength, a blow from which they would never fully recover. Japanese counteroffensive and battle conclusion, June 5-7, 1942. On June 5th, following the catastrophic loss of their 4 carriers, the Japanese forces were reeling from the previous day's events. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, was still at sea with the remaining surface forces, including the battleship fleet under Admiral Nagumo. Despite the devastating blow, the Japanese decided to continue their offensive efforts. The Japanese surface fleet, composed of several battleships and cruisers, attempted a counterattack. Yamamoto still hoped to land his invasion force on Midway and salvage some semblance of victory from the disastrous campaign. His battleships and cruisers, including the powerful Yamato, formed a line of battle and proceeded towards Midway. In the meantime, the U.S. forces continued their search for the remaining Japanese fleet. The submarines USS Tambor and USS Trout were sent to scout and potentially engage the enemy. On June 5th, USS Tambor made contact with the Japanese fleet but failed to successfully launch an attack. In a strange twist of fate, while trying to evade the submarine, 2 Japanese cruisers, Mogami and Mikuma, collided. Mogami was badly damaged, while Mikuma was less so. At dawn on June 6th, aircraft from Midway and the USS Hornet attacked the Japanese fleet, further damaging Mogami and leaving Mikuma fatally damaged and ablaze. Despite a scuttling attempt by her crew, Mikuma would eventually sink on June 7th. While these skirmishes were taking place, the Japanese invasion fleet had also been located by U.S. reconnaissance. A series of attacks on these transports began, but poor coordination and strong defensive anti-aircraft fire resulted in minimal damage to the Japanese transport ships. However, these attacks further dissipated the Japanese forces and added to the attrition of their air cover. Finally, on June 7th, Yamamoto acknowledged the impossibility of the situation and ordered a general retreat. The Battle of Midway had concluded. In the aftermath of the battle, 3 U.S. airmen captured during the battle were executed by the Japanese. The Japanese also took some prisoners, 2 from Mikuma, and 35 more from Hiryu, who were later transferred to Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Midway marked a significant turning point in the Pacific War. It was the first major naval victory for the Allies against the Japanese. Had Japan won the battle, it might have been able to conquer Midway Island and even attack Australia, Alaska, and perhaps even Hawaii. The victory at Midway allowed the Allies to switch to a strategic initiative, paving the way for the landings on Guadalcanal and the prolonged attrition of the Solomon Islands campaign. The loss of 4 large fleet carriers and a significant number of highly trained aircrew and flight deck crews was a heavy blow to the Japanese carrier fleet. The surviving large carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, were insufficient to maintain the balance of power. The Japanese were not able to rebuild their carrier forces to their former strength, and by the time of the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, their air fleets were largely manned by inexperienced and poorly trained pilots. The Battle of Midway also underscored the importance of pre-war naval cryptanalysis and intelligence gathering, contributing to the development of these efforts throughout the war in both the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. The wreckage of several sunken vessels, including Yorktown, Kaga, and Akagi, were discovered many years after the battle, giving historians and researchers precious insight into the events of those fateful days in June 1942. The Battle of Midway is remembered today as one of the most decisive battles of World War II. It was not only a tactical and strategic victory for the United States, but also a critical turning point in the Pacific theater. The destruction of a large part of Japan's carrier fleet marked the beginning of the end of Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. In conclusion, the Battle of Midway was a decisive engagement that significantly affected the outcome of World War II in the Pacific, and its memory remains a testament to the valor and determination of the service members who participated in it.